a series of proposals for government around how they sustain the amazing response shown by many of our communities during the COVID-19 pandemic. Today, hopefully, is an opportunity to learn and understand how the government plans to support the social sector, both in terms of the immediate aftermath of COVID-19, but also in the longer term, and particularly around the levelling up agenda. This will be question and answer, so we'll follow that format. I've got some questions to kick off with Danny, and then we'll pass over to you to ask questions. If you want to ask a question, you can either put it into the chat function and I can ask it for you, or alternatively, use the thumbs up button, we'll unmute you, and you can ask the question directly to Danny. We've got an hour, so it's going to be pretty rapid, but I hope that you get something from it. So Danny, really warm welcome, and good to see you again. And Danny, I think you were due to report back some initial findings or observations on Friday to the Prime Minister. I was just wondering if you could give us some insight on some of those initial findings that you've found.
Great, thanks, Chris, and good to be with you all. So I mean, I can say a little bit about what I've found, but it won't be a surprise to any of you that the main point to make, and this is one that I think is accepted across government, but to my mind it doesn't have the salience that it should in policy, and it's not properly, I don't feel, reflected in our political conversations publicly and in the media, whereas people themselves know this, and obviously everybody who's working in communities knows this, which is that we have something amazing has happened over the last couple of months, some very, very positive developments, both in our neighbourhoods in the way we've all stepped up and made connections that we didn't have before, and have found fulfilment in responsibility. And the other thing that's happened is the flexibility of the public systems, which we've all been crying out for years, saying, why do we have these terribly bureaucratic, siloed public services that don't relate to each other, let alone to the communities they're serving? So frustrating for frontline workers in the public services and in civil society, and so disempowering for communities. That has changed in a really positive way. I mean, I've been talking a bit to people in Liverpool in the last few weeks, and I think that I'd be interested in everyone's views and to what extent that's the case with you. But I've noticed it generally, and certainly in Wiltshire, which is where I represent, suddenly a new openness in the NHS, in local authorities, to actually serve the community rather than and work with community sector rather than operate independently of it. And so I've made a few sort of general recommendations. I can't go into the sort of details of those, but I can give you a bit of some headlines. I mean, I would just say, and this I hope will come out in our discussion, Liverpool is in many ways the template of what needs to happen. The imperative is very strong there because of the social challenges, but it's also the champion, the showcase of a model of community-led and culture-led revival, local social renaissance. So I really think what has happened and is due to happen in Liverpool could pave the way for a better social model. And if I can just sort of summarise briefly, and I reflect this in the report, what I think is the problem with our current model, right, and we've had it for 40 years, is a combination of the sort of doctrine of economic mobility that capital and labour will just find themselves naturally in a sort of free market. It hasn't really worked. Private capital didn't flow into the deindustrialised towns after deindustrialisation, and people didn't get on their bike and move to where the money was either. And we've got to work with the fact that places are quite sticky and they're quite resistant to private investment unless there is the conditions to receive and welcome that private investment. And Liverpool is developing those through its focus on culture, historic focus on culture, makes the place such an attractive city to live in, and its belief in the importance of social infrastructure. So what I've come up with, and let's get into the discussion and see. We welcome thoughts on what more can be done, and I'll quickly talk about the process actually as well. But basically, we obviously need more money. We need more investment in social infrastructure. And there are different ways to do that. And in a sense, it's kind of beyond my remit to sort of say exactly how that should happen. But I do think we need to be putting money to social infrastructure as well as the big economic infrastructure. I think we need to make it easier and more of a social expectation that people step up and take a role in their communities, without a sort of finger wagging, slightly sort of big society-ish, right, everyone, you get out and, after you've worked your double shifts, you've also got to go and collect the rubbish and look after the old people. But nevertheless, enable, I think, the continuation of what we've seen, which is this genuine desire to serve and to be part of a mutual community. And there are ways to do that around encouragement of volunteering. And then lastly, power. It feels like the great missing piece of this conversation historically when we talk about volunteering and even investment. Where is who's calling the shots? And we really need a big focus on community power. And I think that's the essential ingredient in the missing piece in the Conservatives have tried to have private sector-led regeneration. Labour have always tried to have public sector-led regeneration. We've had all these different initiatives over 30 and 40 years. You guys will be very familiar with in Liverpool. The really essential point is the role of the communities themselves in driving this change. In the sense, the money matters less than who's calling the shots. So I'm very keen to properly embed community power into the new model, and there's an opportunity there with the devolution white paper the government's planning for later in the year. So I'm trying to influence that. So money around social infrastructure, encouraging and enabling more the continuation of the mutual aid principle around volunteering, and then getting power into communities feel like the sort of headline, the buckets into which policy needs to fall. Back to you, Chris.
Thanks, Danny. And Danny, you spoke about the process there, just to give people a...
Yes, sorry. So what I've done is, I deliberately had a very short time frame for this report, largely because it's urgent. We've got to get on, capitalise on the community spirit we've seen, and anticipate the big decisions that are being made around spending and legislation and so on that are coming. But that meant that there was no time for a major sort of national consultation and engagement. I mean, I've had an enormous amount of communication over the last month and read a huge amount, had hundreds of conversations like this, but I had to produce something for last week, which I did. Now it's being chewed over in government, I hope, and is being, it'll be published in due course, I hope this in August. Can't be definite because it's up to government what they want to do with my report, and then I hope there'll be some kind of positive response. And then my hope is that we will have the opportunity for a real engaged conversation, with ideally with 1 million plus people who volunteered formally, with all the hundreds and the thousands of community groups, and give my point about community power. We can't design civil society policy in government. That's the problem, which we need to change. So we need to, government will set the framework, but what that framework looks like has to be designed in collaboration with communities and experts and stakeholders of all sorts. So I hope from here, Chris, that's why I'm continue to have these conversations. It's not the end of a process; it's the beginning of one in which I hope we'll have through the autumn a whole bunch of really successful, engaged conversations between government and civil society that get to the right framework at the end. Okay,
great. Thanks, Danny. And Danny, how excited am I to get about this? Like, how hopeful am I to get? Are your colleagues in government, is the Prime Minister, is the Chancellor, is the Cabinet, are they really up for this? Or, or
yeah. Chris, you're a Scouser, you probably don't get very, very excited about things that I might come up with in London. But basically, it's another government plan. Who knows how excited you should be. I suspect you should retain your natural cynicism and think it might all be words. All I can do is produce words. Okay. But as I say, I hope the report itself will be, you'll like it, and what I'm trying to do is to describe a better model and a new paradigm. So it's in a sense quite a big thing I've tried to do, building on the work of loads of people who've been saying all this stuff for years, of course. To what extent the government? They are genuinely keen on this agenda. There's no question that government recognises the need for a place-based, bottom-up the levelling up agenda is not just, they do know it's not just about motorways and broadband. It's about making communities livable and empowered. But how we actually translate that into policy is our great challenge. And in a sense, it's up to all of us to make that case and not just sit on our hands expecting government to fix everything. So that's why I think the next stage is so important, because we need a positive conversation. And I hope, when my report finally comes out, I hope there won't be a general sense of eye rolling. Here we go again, big society, blah. We've got to work positively to make it happen.
Yeah. And Danny, just to reflect back on, say, big society, like when you reflect back on it, what, maybe this would be my scouse cynicism, but, I'm an optimist, I guess, at the moment after watching my football team win the league. But when you look back on it, what do you think could have been done better in terms of its implementation?
Yeah, well, that's a very complicated question. I mean, the main thing is it was a very, very unfortunate reality that they were trying to change the social paradigm. And we've been talking about it since when I worked for David Cameron, when he was big first party leader in the kind of early part of the 2005 Parliament. And we were talking about all of this stuff then. And then the crash happened, and suddenly the story became about the economy. And then the decision was taken to try and get the public finances under control, hence austerity. And that was the context for the big society, and that's what the problem was. And I don't think this is their fault, because I don't think this is true, but the perception really developed that the big society was not just a cover for cuts, but really an attempt to get communities to do government's job for it, and to just sort of palliate a broken system. So rather than fixing the system, getting volunteers to clean up the mess.
Yeah.
And actually, what it really was about, and at least, I think in its conception, was about transformation, getting a better model. And that's what we need to do now. Perhaps the story should be more about changing the economic model as well as the social model. And in a sense, I think we need to be more ambitious now than they were in 2010. But we've always got another massive economic crisis on our hands, but the public finances are in a better shape than they were. And we've got the conditions, I think, are better for the sort of transformation that's needed, and certainly the political pressure on it is very strong for that. So I think we can get it right this time.
Okay, all right. Thanks, Danny. And Danny, like, to an area like Liverpool, or Liverpool City region, which I suppose in relation to Europe and ERDF funding, it's obviously been a major recipient of that over the past decades. The Shared Prosperity Fund is billed as its replacement. How much insight have you got about the Shared Prosperity Fund and about the ability of the social sector to be able to access that and use that for its purpose?
I'm afraid the Shared Prosperity Fund remains sort of in a holding pattern because of all of the current challenges that government has. But so I'm afraid we are where we've been for a couple of years, which is hoping that they're going to design it in a way that reflects the need for community power and community leadership and social as well as economic infrastructure. So I'm afraid I've got no news on that other than no news at all, but my hope remains, and no reason to think it won't happen, that it's designed in a way that gets the principles right and doesn't just put all the money through the LEP. Your LEP is your MCA, isn't it? I think I forget the mechanics, but so that might be better. But however the money travels, it needs to have without ring fencing too much, it needs to have a focus on building up community assets, not just economic ones.
Okay. Well, Danny's open for questions, so I look at the faces that are looking back at me. I've probably got another question for Danny, but if people would like to, after this, feel free to ask Danny questions. Danny, I think a sort of final question for me is, And I think it's relevant to some participants on this call, and I think you yourself have written about it, which is community land trusts. And we've got quite a number of them across Liverpool City region. Communities looking to come together to build their own homes or to create homes in their communities, but often restricted perhaps by access to funding from Homes England or some of the process around that. Have you got any, would your hope and ambition be part of the work you're doing would open that up more for community land trusts?
Yeah, I mean, 100%. They feel like to me the absolute model for not just for housing, but obviously they paved the way. I mean, the great thing about them, CLT is the way to get to increase the densification of cities without outraging neighbours, and they also work in rural areas. So they are a brilliant model of community-led housing, and the challenge is within the current constraints of housing policy and finance and Homes England spending rules. There hasn't been enough of them, and then that tells the Treasury they're not very popular or successful or practical. This is a problem across our sector, that it seems so small scale, and then that is used as a reason not to support it. So we need to have confidence in the model, and again, the government recognises the value, but I'm not yet sure that they sufficiently see the opportunity with CLT. So there's a community housing fund which is needs to be renewed, and I'm pushing very hard for that. So I'm hoping in the budget or the autumn statement, the spending review, we'll get a fresh commitment to CLTs. We certainly need them.
Okay, great. Alan Loudon, you've got a question there. I don't know if you want to unmute yourself and pose that to Danny, please.
Yeah, I was partly aware of the fact that if somebody didn't say something, then nobody would say anything. So I thought I'd just sort of put a bit of a left field question to Danny. Hi, Danny.
Hello, good to see you.
So it was just about the possibility of a universal basic income as a first step to policy change, and sort of it is a bit, in the past maybe has seen as a bit of a left field idea, but now the new language about levelling up, potentially a year of universal basic income could really change quite a lot of things. And I just wondered what your thoughts are, and what government's thoughts are in terms of that as a possibility.
Okay. Well, thanks for that, and good to see you. I think you had pink hair the last time we met.
Yeah, probably.
But good to see you. Right. Well, I don't think it's a goer with the government at the moment. The problem with UBI is twofold. One is, these are practical problems rather than principal problems from principle. Well, actually, no, there's a practical problem and a problem from principle. The practical one is it doesn't seem to work where it's being tried. So, Finland, elsewhere, they've tried it. It doesn't seem to incentivize the sort of behaviours that we all would like to hope for if people are basically have enough money to live on without working. It basically means that it's increased the sort of negative social outcomes of the unemployment engenders in general in people. Particularly men. Without the framework of what kind of positive leisure time looks like, it doesn't seem to be successful. And in a sense, that goes to the problem of principle, which I think we might need to adapt to in this century as the world of work changes. But I think the fundamental belief that work is better than not work, and we exist to produce, not to consume, and we derive our value from the contribution we make, and that is best made through employment, is a very difficult one to change overnight, and not one we should be trying to change too quickly. We need to be. I think a lot of problem with our culture is the idea that we're just passive consumers of cheap stuff, and that's where happiness lies. And I worry that UBI plays into that paradigm rather than saying actually we should be ennobled through our contribution and our productive capacity. But world of work is changing. The robots are eating the jobs, and it could be that we enter into this glorious phase. I mean, you know, the best life anyone's ever lived was the life of an 18th century aristocrat, well educated, full of responsibility, cultured, but not having to earn a crust. Of course, 18th century aristocrats didn't all behave very well, and we need to get the culture right and the framework right before we start making that the norm for us all. But I appreciate the question, and it is in a sense the right one, because what are we going to do if there are no jobs? And the Kickstarter program, which is paying companies to take young people on, I think has the seeds of something really exciting around civil society and social contribution for young people. And I think we should be thinking about how we can pay young people to make a contribution, even if it's not necessarily in an economic, in a work context where they're basically working for a company, making money for somebody, but actually doing something for environment or for communities. So we in a sense got the seeds of a kind of youth UBI in the Kickstarter program, possibly. Thanks, Helen.
Thanks.
It's good to hear about all your faith work, Helen.
Yeah, and I'll catch up with you. Good to catch up with you at some point about the voluntary sector and the work that's been happening in Liverpool. Or Chris's, we're all part of it, but it'd be good to catch up at some point. I think I sent you an email. Somebody sent me an email back.
Fantastic. All right, that'll be in my pile. Thanks.
Great. Thanks, Ellen. Thanks, Danny. Caroline from Lloyds Bank Foundation, I don't know if you could unmute yourself to pose your question to Danny.
Yeah, sure. So Danny, you mentioned about the need not to think in silos earlier. At Lloyds Bank Foundation, we fund small local charities, and while we fund them with kind of long-term funding to deliver services, they're often reliant on local authorities for a proportion of their income, and to ensure that kind of basic level of services are provided in that area. So really interested to know, as part of your review or in working with government, what sense you get of the appetite to look really properly and long term about local government funding, and particularly in terms of the redistribution of government funding between different areas as part of the levelling up agenda.
Thanks, Caroline. Well, I'm a big admirer of your work and the relentless focus on small charities. And the problem is, as you know, that government isn't good at talking to small organisations, and hence we get huge PLCs beating out any social sector bidders for public contracts, and even when small organisations are involved in delivery of public services, they're at the end of a long supply chain in which all the profit is extracted upwards and all the risk is pushed downwards, and all of the values that small charities have is sort of squeezed out. And it would be good if local government had more money to commission or make grants to local civil society. And your question about redistribution is a good one, because ultimately, if my belief in the need for community power, taken to its logical conclusion, means that places should be responsible for raising their own finance, and it's not the job of central government to either raise the money or distribute or allocate funding to local civil society. That's the job that should be done locally. Of course, the tax base in poor places is smaller, and those are the places that need the money. So we do need a redistribution mechanism, and we mentioned UK SPF, Shared Prosperity Fund. There are other big opportunities, I think, to do that, because I think in principle we should be trying to localise tax raising and spending, but we need other mechanisms to ensure that places that don't have the strong tax base nevertheless get additional funding. So, there's a white paper coming out later in the year. I'm not informed of detail of it, but I'm hopeful that it will both increase local responsibility and empower local democracy, but also bear in mind the need for a redistribution mechanism. And ultimately, to your general point about small charities, I think we need a better commissioning framework. There's a whole set of reforms around social values that need to be introduced, that are being worked on in government, I know, to ensure that commissioners take account of the real value of bids, and of providers, rather than just looking at the bottom line. And that will, I think, go a long way to recognising what small charities can do and bringing them into the fold more. So I think procurement and commissioning is probably the great hope for small providers.
Thanks, Danny, and thanks, Caroline. Andrea Watts from Sefton Council, I think you're still here. You've got a question for Danny, if you want to mute yourself.
Hi, Chris. Thanks for that. Yeah, it was just about capitalising on it. There's a specific moment in time when we can build on a behaviour change of increased amounts of volunteers. I think Danny said right when he talks about sticky places. So our evidence shows us that people want to volunteer right there where they live. And if we try and encourage them to move about a little bit, that's not usually something that volunteers want to do. So it's capturing that moment of time in terms of supporting the voluntary sector to carry on that great work, but also understanding that public sector finances are always going to be tricky. And I absolutely agree with Caroline, sometimes charities just need somebody to keep the lights on, which is what we see certainly in Sefton as our role in supporting those smaller groups. But actually they will support our public sector finance challenges as well. So the more resilient our communities are, the less demand on some of our services there will be. So it's a great circular piece, but it's got to be acted fairly quickly.
Thanks, Andrew. Well, what do you suggest? I mean, I completely agree about the more local, the better. We've all seen that in our own communities. What do you think is the right framework to enable that, and what's the role? I mean, did you say you work for the council? What's the role of the council in enabling that, do you think?
Certainly, I work for Sefton Council, and we've been heavily supportive of our CVS and our voluntary sector. We see it's almost like they're part of our public service, if you like, within the borough. So we've protected quite a lot of those budgets for our voluntary sector, but it's getting increasingly challenging to do that. So it's making sure that we're recognised in our budget allocations and our central government funding, but also that supports us to make savings in our service delivery, because our voluntary sector is supporting our community. So it's recognising that it's all one big system. I think a bit like Caroline was saying when we were talking about silos, it's all one big system.
Yeah, exactly. And again, that's for me, it's just another argument for localising power and money and responsibility, because you can pool budgets more effectively at a local level than trying to do a deal between DWP, MOJ, NHS, which all have to go up their respective chains of command. So yes, and congratulations if you're managing to preserve spending on civil society, on local voluntary sector, because that's the great challenge. And I hope that's recognised and understood locally. It feels like the right approach. I mean, I was very inspired by Wigan, where, as many of you will know, they've made a very explicit deal, as they call it, with communities to say we will preserve spending on the front line by cutting our own back office costs, but also by passing responsibility onto communities, onto households, and to community groups. And they've done a brilliant job. But I think they've also done a really good job at comms. They're just, people know about, in the sort of policy space, know about Wigan. And the more local authorities that can really celebrate that aspect, that principle. They're not just efficient, and they don't just keep council tax down. They do this very deliberate work of engaging communities and putting responsibility and investment into the social sector. And as you say, seeing them as part of the system. That's the point I just really want to drum into national government, which is social sector matters massively. It's not just a nice to have around the edges. It is in fact the heart of everything. So thanks for that. And yeah, I mean, the more we can do to promote that model, the better.
And Danny, in terms of further devolution, given what's gone on with COVID and the sort of attention that it requires, given what will come with Brexit, how much appetite do you think there is going to be, or bandwidth even there's going to be in government for further devolution to areas like Liverpool?
I think it's high. I mean, there seems to be a genuine recognition that that's the way to go, and to build on. I think it's generally seen that what was first begun in Manchester has been successful around health and social care, and that principle should apply more generally. I think not least because of the crisis, the sort of what you might normally expect about the politics, our big cities are usually Labour controlled, is being set aside, and it's obviously some of our conservative mayors, like in Birmingham and Teesside and elsewhere, that are driving this agenda. So I think, I've no idea genuinely, but I'd be disappointed if we don't see a firm commitment to further devolution to the mayoral authorities. And as I was saying, I think Liverpool is paving the way, and it would be perverse not to recognise, endorse, and support that, and to really get behind Liverpool, and maybe Liverpool will get behind Conservative government one day. In response, who knows? Okay,
we'll keep. Yeah, I'm not sure about that one, Danny. But we can try.
Long-term strategy.
Yeah, long-term plan. Nick from Locality. Nick, I think you're there. I don't know if you want to unmute yourself. I think you've got a question particularly about procurement.
Yes, thanks, Chris. Hi, Danny.
Hi.
Yeah, just a question on public services, which you mentioned in your opening remarks, but not in the headlines from your review. So I'd be keen to see where public services fit in there, and specifically on some of the flexibilities you mentioned. So I think one of the things we've found through our research in recent months is that the kind of trusting relationships that have been able to be formed between commissioners and community sector organisations has been one of the silver linings of all of this, and think it needs to be the basis for future systems. So yeah, we'd be keen to understand what you think government's appetite for keeping some of those flexibilities is into the future.
Yes, thanks, Nick. I'm not sure, to be honest. I'm hoping to find out, because that's what I've been arguing for. So let's see what reactions I get to that principle that from the top down, procurement rules were relaxed from Cabinet Office, and whether that engendered a change or it was a response to a change. But what happened, we've seen locally amazing new sort of can-do spirit, partly in local authorities. So Bristol City Council, apparently, I heard this from an adoption agency or fostering agency, suddenly found that what took them 9 months previously to vet a potential foster family, suddenly could do it in 6 weeks. Whether or in the NHS, where they suddenly had a open posture to the local social sector, and particularly to the care sector, in a way that previously they operated like a fortress. This is what we need to sustain. I don't think anyone wants to go back to previous models, and obviously there's greater dynamism through the use of digital that we've all been calling for, and people have been puzzled why it hasn't happened. Suddenly, half the NHS is doing its consultations online. That massively increases capacity. We should be able to. I was talking to a mental health organisation the other day, we should be able to clear the CAMS backlog, the Children and Adolescent Mental Health Service backlog, within a month or two, if it suddenly was possible to do online consultations, which it is, at least for the initial kind of that sort of triaging stage of mental health. So, I just think organically and naturally it's going to happen. To what extent government is going to be making it happen? Well, we need to work out what that looks like. I don't have a single, right, these are the levers that need to be pulled or the laws that need to be changed. I think it is a cultural change that needs to happen. There is stuff around social value commissioning that I mentioned, the Cabinet Office are working on. I'm quite hopeful. I mean, it's all very detailed. Claire Dove, who some of you will know, is the Crown representative for the VCS sector, and she's been doing loads of work with Cabinet Office on procurement. So I think we'll get some good. I hope we'll get some good news on that. And then it's really about policy design and across the piece. And I think you pick a policy area, and the answer to its problems is more community involvement. You get more prevention, get better value for money, and you get all sorts of spillover effects. So I just think we need to embed this principle really firmly. Everything from refugee resettlement, which is so much better when it's community sponsorship model rather than local authority, to CLTs we mentioned in housing, to a whole range of stuff around health and social care. Social care is just why the hospice is largely volunteer driven and social care is this terrible private equity led expensive nightmare, when we should be pushing responsibility for vulnerable adults and old people upstream from expensive commercial provision back into community models. So across the piece, this is the answer, and the purpose of my report and my work is to try and get that mindset more firmly adopted.
Thanks, Nick. Thanks, Danny. And Danny, look, you might be blue and I might be red, but I think that what you talk about is something that I fully sign up to, and I think most people on this call perhaps do as well. How do we help you? How do we, I don't know how much of a lone voice you are, but how do we, give you the evidence and give you the momentum that makes this case, more persuasive? And I'm aware there are colleagues here on the call from the Combined Authority as well. Okay,
I don't know, Chris. Thank you for saying that. I there isn't a single argument to be made. It would be so easy if there was. This is got to be a diverse, sort of babble of voices making related points, and change happens when enough people, when people in power realise that a lot of people out there want it. And when it chimes with their own worldview and philosophy, which is in a sense my job to try and sort of translate this agenda into conservative language, which I think is very easy. But I suppose if you're asking practically, apart from helping with ideas, which I've received from many of you, and please can keep them coming, as and when ideas like these are made, I guess I would hope for a positive reception and not a cynical, Tories are up to something evil mindset. And I suppose most of all, I'm so impressed when I hear people, and I heard this. I hope you wouldn't mind me saying so. I was speaking to Tony, your city council chief exec, yesterday. About the city plan for Liverpool, which is really inspiring and tremendous. And he was saying, before the Tories came in, the city wasn't in a good state either. It wasn't, when the money was flowing in the first decade of the century, we had these problems. And okay, you can blame the Tories for a generation earlier for that, but really, just vast amounts of public money is not the answer. And if we can change the conversation from how much public money is going in to how are we spending public money and what other agents and resources can we call on in communities in addition to public money? If the Conservative government was hearing that from places like Liverpool, they would say, that now you're talking my language. Obviously there is a need for investment, and I hope I've made that point, and I really believe it. But if that's the only thing the government hears Liverpool say, that we'll have the relationship between this government and Liverpool that we've had for a long time, and we need a better one. And I get that from your civic leaders very strongly. So I suppose that's the practical point. It would be great to.
Good advice. Good advice. Paul Myers, I believe you've got a question for Danny. If you want to unmute yourself, Paul.
Hi, Danny. Yeah, you made a little comment in the beginning and said that public funds are in a better position. I just wonder if you could tell us a little bit more about that, give us some insight. In what way, how, and kind of what does that look like for us? Do you think?
Yeah, thanks. Well, Paul, all I meant was that we're not in a sort of worldwide credit crunch like we were in 2010. There's a different economic problem now. But the good news is we did manage to balance the books, very, very painfully over the last 10 years, and interest rates are very low, so the borrowing is there. We're going to get back to the state of the debt that we all complained about, or we complained about 10 years ago. But we are in a position to do that. We can borrow, and obviously we are, to an enormous degree. So fortunately, we've got that headroom now, and and there is a determination not to get out of this through cuts or through deep cuts, and I really hope that means not through local authority cuts, which is of course DWP and local government took the brunt of austerity. The NHS education didn't experience cuts in the degree to which those other parts of public spending did. They actually grew in real terms, so just not at the same rate as before. So the axe fell on local government, and then therefore on local government's non-statutory obligations, which is civil society, so youth services, etc. And that was the great shame and tragedy of austerity, was the way that ultimately it was civil society which took the brunt, as well as benefits. And there seems to be, we hear, we're not going back to that. And that means, to square that circle, we've got to grow, we've got to have prosperity, and we've got to have economic renewal and jobs being created and businesses being set up. So, which is why we need a very entrepreneurial attitude now. And I don't think that's in conflict with the civil society folks. I think they're complementary. We need entrepreneurialism and on both sort of commercial and non-commercial activity, and they support each other. Yes. But anyway, as I say, the fact is, Prime Minister said we're not going back to austerity. So let's really, really hope that's the case.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you on that. And then just picking up on your last point, about not just asking for handouts from central governments, fully agree with you there as well. But then maybe just one thing to raise is kind of, there seems to be a bit of a disconnect between the rate at which big business gets money, whether that's loan at, 0.2% or 0.6% for Ryanair and these huge companies. And then for myself as a small social enterprise, I have to borrow money at 10%. And I just wonder, is there an argument for leveling the playing field and giving small social enterprises, equal opportunity with the big boys who are getting basically free money if government wants us to be competitive?
Well, Paul, that reflects the problem I mentioned, which is government's very bad at talking to small players, and it can have a conversation with Ryanair. And that's tens of thousands of jobs, whereas it would have to come to conversations with hundreds or thousands of social enterprises to get that scale, and it doesn't seem able to do that. And our commercial banking system is geared towards big businesses and with big balance sheets and healthy profits that go to shareholders and not to social enterprises. So we need a better banking system, and fundamentally. In the meantime, yes, we need to be taking active steps to help social enterprises access affordable finance. And there are various steps around that, which have already been introduced, like the Fair for All Finance initiative that dormant assets funds, trying to achieve more, get money into places that don't attract credit normally. There's the Access Foundation, again, dormant assets money that provides blended finance, so a combination of grant, and debt. But it's not on the scale that we need. So I agree with you that we need to do more to support social enterprises to get money. I don't think there's a straightforward thing that can be done to level the playing field, I'm afraid, that I can think of. But we need a better system, and I'd make various suggestions around that in the report.
And Danny, thanks, Paul. I guess it's not just the interest rate, which I think is a challenge to quite a lot of small business or small social enterprises or charities. I think it's the terms of the investment that comes with it. So the length, be it 5 or 10 years. I think that sort of social infrastructure that's required as part of that is a more patient form of finance for some of these organisations, which is not 5 or 10, but it's more like 15, 20, 25. And particularly as some of these organisations have been the bedrock of our communities for probably greater than 25 years. I think that's one of the gaps. I think, Ollie, you raised your thumb in a Zoom way. I didn't know if that was a question or you just wanted to raise your thumb.
Yes, that was. It's just to mention the point that Daniel's also put in the chat about the Kindred funds that the Combined Authority is developing, which I think is a response to the point that Paul was making about the difficulty that social enterprises have getting finance. So this is a model, a fund that we're developing with the sector that will provide patient finance. And that recognises that very problem that Paul mentioned. And of course, I think this links to, I think, the point that you are receptive about the role that combined authorities can play and the way in which that they can work with their sector locally and apply their local knowledge. And of course, another important aspect of how Kindred will work is it's not just about providing finance, but it's also about providing those organisations with the support that they need to develop and prosper. And again, that's something that I think is better organised on a sort of combined authority footprint than some large national contract.
That's good to hear. Well, I'm very encouraged by that, and it would be good to read about it and see to what extent there's a model there that I could promote. So thanks, Ollie.
Okay, I'll make sure that happens. Thanks, Danny.
Thank you.
There's somebody just shared the recovery plan in the group there.
I just stuck it in the chat. Danny, if you want to download it.
Yes, I've had the pleasure of that document before already. So, I think
Kindred is a part of that recovery
great
plan.
Okay, that's it. Brilliant.
That's what we're seeing there.
Fantastic, great.
And Danny, I think that recovery plan that you read there from the Combined Authority, and I think also that the plan that was put forward by the City Council, is looking at both that economic agenda and that social agenda, and there's a direct ask there for resource, money to be straight from government to support it. How likely do you think it is that funding would come to support that recovery plan, and if so, how quick?
How likely is it to get that investment, Chris? Do you say?
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I know that city and Combined Authority leaders are having a whole bunch of conversations with Treasury and MHCLG, which is above my level, and I hope, as I say, this is what I think government should be doing. Whether they'll find the money, who knows? But no doubt there'll be fraught negotiations over the autumn. But to what extent? I mean, there's a big focus on towns and on levelling up towns. I think Liverpool is generally held up as a success story. So to what extent government will be up for reinforcing success, or saying right now let's move on to onto the towns agenda. Of course, you've got towns in your combined authority area. So that's probably the argument to be made. But I think it'll all be about the relationships that Steve and Joe have with Number 10 and elsewhere, which I don't know about, I'm afraid.
Okay.
We would value a local blue political champion. That's sad.
Okay, Daniel, thank you. who are you? Where are you from, Daniel?
I'm from Liverpool, so I'm from the Combined Authority.
You're in the Combined Authority.
Yeah, so I was heavily involved in producing the recovery plan.
Okay.
And the intention of that plan, we expect the discussions to be on a kind of scheme by scheme basis. We're not expecting a big fat check for all things in there. But we're conscious that we need support for specific schemes to get that traction within government. Got it for some, and not for others.
How's the great digital loop, Atlantic Loop project? Is that? I remember being quite excited.
Well, actually, I mean, the way that this plan is targeted is that it's within an 18-month time frame for delivery that we're focused on. So digital is in there but it's a long-term opportunity.
Yeah.
We're engaged with private sector partners at the moment, but we're not saying that that's something that's going to transform us overnight. And actually, for recovery, it's about shovels in the ground in the next 18 months.
Yeah.
So we've been realistic in the way that the plan is structured.
Okay. Thanks.
Right. Danny, just to wrap up, if I could, I think Francesca's got a question, if she's there and can unmute herself.
Hi, Danny. Just a brief one. You touched upon some of the findings of the research from your report, and some of the things that didn't surprise you, but I'd just be interested to know if there were some surprising things that have come out of the conversations and research that you've done on the BCSE sector.
You mean, did I change my mind about anything? As ever, you get to a certain age and experience just confirms all your prejudices. And I think coronavirus, someone called it coronavirus formation bias or something. It's basically confirmed to everyone what they thought already. So, the universal basic income gang are like saying, this is what we need. I'm saying what we need is stronger communities, and others will be saying we need lower taxes or higher taxes. And it happens to be exactly what they thought before, just more so. I mean, I suppose I've been very pleased and inspired by what's happened. It confirms my sense that there is a huge latent resource in our communities, which is people and their relationships. So obviously there's a huge amount of hidden need has been exposed, which is a good thing. We've discovered literally, we have discovered people in our own neighbourhoods who were below the radar and suffering. And the extent of that, I guess, is surprising, but distressing. I'm trying to think of where I've been found something I didn't believe before. I suppose I'm quite. Actually, one thing, I didn't realise to what extent people were prepared to volunteer for a national effort. My belief in communities and localism and my sort of suspicion of government and big government has led me to think people don't want to volunteer for some abstract thing. Even a local authority level, I always used to laugh, I still do, when I see a bus in London with an advert on the back saying "Foster for Haringey," as if you're going to do fostering for your local authority rather than for the kids. But actually, people were prepared. They were volunteered for the NHS in an amazing number. Of course, the NHS wasn't very good at managing that volunteer resource, as we know. Well, government wasn't. But the fact that people are prepared to step up for a national effort, and I wonder if that's sustainable. I suspect we need to localise the commitment. And as somebody said at the beginning, people will do more for their own street and than being asked to go and help somewhere else. But I think we can make an appeal on the back of this for please step up and help the national effort. In a sense, the call from the big society, which everybody sneered at 10 years ago, which was why should we be helping this weird government initiative? We're already doing as much as we can locally. Maybe the call now would have a better reception if it was phrased right, and if it was definitely not just government saying, come and help us. It was like, there's a national call, let's all work together. In practice, that means helping locally, probably, but you're doing it as part of a national effort. I've been pleasantly surprised by how that seems to resonate. I don't know if it will for long, but I suppose that's been one thing that surprised me.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Jessica. Thanks, Danny. Danny, we're to the 11 o'clock mark now. So I guess just to wrap up, we'll expect to see hopefully a report at some point in August, and then engagement thereafter about how we make this a reality and how it engages with communities. Just checking that's right.
Yeah, I don't know, Chris, but yeah, I mean, I wrote it for publication, so I hope it'll see the light of day. It might, I'm not asking them to endorse everything in it, but I hope they'll be happy for it to come out. And it's supposed to be helpful to the government rather than unhelpful, so it's sort of in their hands.
Yeah, great. And Danny, we take your advice about how we should, particularly for this region, relate to government and be optimistic with government to help get the support that we need for our local area. And if you need any more ammo or any more support with the sort of principles of what you're suggesting, then I'm sure there's plenty of people on this call that'll be willing to help and support with that. Thank you for your time this morning. It's been really valuable. And I think for others on the call, we'll be taking a bit of a pause of regroup during August with people on various holidays, and we'll be coming back together on the 9th of September, which is with Kathy Evans, who is the Chief Executive of Children's England. And Kathy has been doing a lot of work. Danny smiles, she probably knows Kathy quite well, on lobbying government on how children's services can be commissioned and procured differently to support some of our most vulnerable in our communities. So there'll be an invite that goes out at August for that event. But Danny, thanks again for today, and thanks for everything.
Very, very enjoyable. No, thank you, and well done, Chris, for everything you're doing. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Danny. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.